So those are four things you could do yourself. Probably the most popular one is to go to a third-party website. And there are several third-party websites out there who will take that burden off of you, and you just send Gene to, one of them is called Verify Investor. Send Gene to Verify Investor. I send Verify Investor what they need. So then they send you a certificate that says, hey, we've checked Eugene Trowbridge out, and we've taken steps to be reasonably assured that he's accredited.
Yeah, that's a great, I use that site a lot. Because like I said, it's depending on how the comfort level of them releasing documents to you. So maybe that's just a easier transition for them to go to that website, third party, and then you'll be able to get the certificate to ensure that they are accredited to move forward.
Right. One of the things I'm concerned about you asking me for my tax returns is if I send you my tax returns, you have to keep that. You have to keep that for 7 years in case you're ever audited. So that's confidential. Okay. Who else in your office is going to look at my tax returns? I think you have a concern about that.
Of course.
So that's why Verify Investor will let them worry about that.
Welcome to the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast, your source for real-world strategies focused on creating long-term wealth, cash flow, and financial freedom through real estate. Through guidance, tips, and stories of highly successful real estate investors and thought leaders, we provide you the tools to succeed and reach the lifestyle you always wanted. And now your host, Dwaine Clarke.
Hello and welcome to the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast. This is your host, Dwaine Clarke. And today we have Eugene Trowbridge of Trowbridge and Sidoti out in Marietta, California. Gene is an attorney who specializes in syndication and crowdfunding. His firm has represented over 450 clients and have authored securities documents of over $3 billion of equity raised since 2014. Gene is also a syndicator himself who sponsors 16 funds concentrating in the building and managing of self-storage. How you doing, Gene? And thank you and welcome to the show.
I'm doing fine today, Dwaine. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I really appreciate our pre-call talk as well to get a little bit, to know a little bit more about your background and your travel. So it's already good to kind of connect on a deeper level. But I'm also really excited to get you on because like I had mentioned, we have a lot of investors and syndicators and business owners that listen to the podcast and to the program. So it's really a blessing to have someone that not only is on the law side of the syndication, but also had boots on the ground as far as putting together different projects as well. Another thing that was pretty interesting about your background, your educational and the CCIM. So would you be able to kind of delve a little bit deeper into your background and story to how your whole transition from, syndication, real estate, and, now again, law?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, I got out of college a very, very long time ago and went into the commercial brokerage business, selling commercial real estate. And after about 4 or 5 years of that, I had purchased a couple properties myself and with some friends back in Minnesota at that time, and kind of liked the idea of managing the properties that I owned with others. So I decided I was going to concentrate on that. And in '79, I moved my family from Minnesota to California for the weather and decided that when I made the move to California, I would concentrate on being a syndicator. Mm-hmm. So really from 1980, let's say, until about 2002, I was putting together deals. I was a syndicator. But somewhere in there, I knew I wouldn't be a syndicator forever because I like to say that the care and maintenance of partners can wear you down. Mm-hmm. So when I was 45, Dwaine, I went to law school.
Wow.
And passed the California bar the first time and took about 4 or 5 years to figure out exactly how I was going to get out of the syndication business and go into law. I always knew I wasn't going to be a divorce lawyer. I knew I was going to be a syndication lawyer. I just didn't exactly know how to do that. And at my age at the time, I couldn't go to work for anyone else. There is age discrimination in the legal practice. they're not going to hire a guy at that age. So by the time I was about 50, I opened my own practice, and for the last 21 years, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, 50 to 21 years, I've been just simply practicing law. And in 2014, I decided to take on a partner. So Jillian Sidoti, which I'm sure several of your listeners have heard of or seen Jillian as. We travel around because we're both pretty prominent in the social media world. She and I formed a partnership in 2014, and that's why we're Trowbridge Sidoti. And so we just do a lot of business. I do Regulation D offerings. Your listeners might be familiar with that private placements, primarily in real estate. I would say 95 out of 100 of my offerings are real estate. Jillian does Regulation A plus offerings, which are a little more complicated, more involved with the SEC and getting a permit. And I would say that maybe 6 out of 10 of her offerings are real estate, and the other 4 are different than real estate. She's a broader practice than I do. But collectively, our firm does very well, and we're very pleased with that.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, the like I mentioned, Regulation 8, I guess that's a whole another level of conversation, and maybe get your partner on at one point to even talk about that. Yeah, most of the investors that I talk to on a daily basis are in that Regulation D category, and that's why I was grateful to have you to come on and kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, because we also have some newer people who want to form stuff. So we get scenarios where, say, 2 or 3 guys wants to buy a property, manage it together. Then you have people who are syndicator, quote unquote, and raising the funds and managing the assets for those investors. Could you talk about the difference between both, as well as what's required from either forming a LLC and a operating agreement to forming a PPM, and what's the difference between both of those?
All right, we should really start with how the structure generally goes. A question I get all the time is hey, Dwaine, I want to put together 3 or 4 people, and I don't want it to be a syndication. Well, that's a bad question, because that is syndication. Just pooling money from multiple investors to get some business done is a syndication. The better question is, hey, I want to pool some investors, but I don't want it to be a security. How do I do that? That's really the question. So typically what you do is you put together an LLC. That's the most common legal entity form we use today to pool investors' money. You form an LLC. The investors invest their money there, and then someone has to manage that. So we probably form another LLC, which I'm going to call the manager LLC, the syndicator LLC. And that's where I would be if I was going to be the syndicator, or you would be if you were going to be the sponsor of the group. And you make all the decisions. So now what we have is we have a group of investors who've invested their money. The purpose is to make a profit. And someone else is going to do it. Someone else is going to run it. Well, that's just the classic definition of a security: an investment of money in a common enterprise for the expectation of profit through the results of someone else. So the investors are all passive, and Dwaine or Gene runs the organization through the manager LLC. So at that point, we really have a place to split off if you were thinking about a flow chart. You've got your entity formed. Now, if you don't want it to be a security, and your example was 2 or 3 people, they wanted to go together, buy something and manage it together, okay. So if you don't want it to be a security, you just simply have the LLC with the investors, and we would call it member managed. So the 3 members make all the decisions. You don't need a manager LLC. All the decisions are made at the LLC level for the investment. And so it doesn't meet the definition of a security because no one's passive. Everyone is making the decisions themselves. Now, if you've got 10 people, that won't work. Someone needs to be the boss. Someone needs to get the decisions made. So now we have the entity with all the investors, and then we have the manager entity. That throws us into the securities world because someone else is making all the decisions for the investors. They're passive. You, as a syndicator, are active, and now you're in the securities world.
Is that, you would say, more cut and dry, say with the operating agreement that has an actual business plan and it's all set in stone that, we're going to buy the property, we're going to put X amount of dollars to rehab it, then we're going to hold it for a couple of years, we're going to hire this manager. Does that still constitute as, like, depending on how many investors that are involved, that you have to split that into a?
No, what the issue is it a security or not? Okay. PPMs, private placement memorandums, are required in the securities side. If you're going to do a 3 or 4 person LLC and they're going to run it themselves, you don't need a PPM because it's not a security. But you sure as heck need an operating agreement, which are the rules of how your business is going to be run. In the securities world, the real requirement of the securities law, Dwaine, is that you give your investors full disclosure prior to them making an investment decision. And the vehicle for the full disclosure is the private placement memorandum. That's the story. That's the story of whatever happens. And then the operating agreement are the rules and how we're going to run the group so that we fulfill what the story is. But if it's not a security, you don't need the disclosure. Now, it's really quite difficult to put together a group of people and really convince the SEC, if they're asking, that it's not a security. I mean, the 3 of you buying a property, let's say 3 guys are in business together and they want to buy a building to run their automotive parts business out of. Okay, they're going to do a franchise. They're going to buy their own building. Well, the 3 of them can buy their building, and if all the decisions are made unanimously, that wouldn't be a security. But anytime you get into there, 3 of them buy it, but they're going to give Dwaine all the responsibility for making all the decisions, now you're in trouble. So be quite careful. I would just say, for this conversation, if you're going to keep it out of the securities world, the operating agreement has to say that all major decisions are unanimous, period.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. As far as the regulation, can you kind of explain the most commonly used ones and kind of the difference between those?
The private placement business is a huge business. In the last couple of years, the SEC has said that the amount of money raised in what we're talking about here is somewhere between 1.5 and 1.7 trillion dollars. Wow. This is more in private placement money than is raised on the New York Stock Exchange. This is where small business operates in the United States. When your brokerage people go out and look at properties to buy or sell or lease, many of those properties are owned by an entity. They're all some LLC, some corporation, or whatever. Well, every one of those was a syndication. So we run into it all the time. And so the SEC says this is really big business. And of that 1.5, 1.7 trillion dollars, 90% of that money is raised in Regulation D, which is a rule in the securities law that governs what we call private placements. Historically, a private placement is, Dwaine, you know me, I know you, we'll invest together. You run the deal, you get 10 people we'll come together, you be the manager, we'll be in the investors, and it's a private placement. There's no advertising, there's no general solicitation. Everyone knows everyone. And for the very longest time, actually back to 1901, when there was a major change in the Regulation D offering, it was just as simple as that. you could go out and raise money from people that you know, put it together in a LLC, and you could run it, and it would be a security, and it would be under what they call Rule 506, Regulation D, Rule 506, which is where almost all the money is raised. Now, in Rule 506, the problem was, let's say you were the syndicator. You could only tell people you know what your deal is. And if I was an investor and I knew you, I would know what your deals are. But I wouldn't know any other deals that were in the marketplace because I didn't know any other sponsors. And you didn't know any other investors other than your circle, your database, if you would. So in 2013, Congress passed the Jobs Act, and they said, you know, there's a lot of rich and smart people out there. We should give them the opportunity to meet all the Dwaines in the world who are having offerings. And then Dwaine should have the opportunity to meet the million people in the United States who are accredited, rich or smart. And let's do that. If we can give Dwaine the opportunity to tell people who are rich and smart, tell accredited investors about his offerings, he'll raise more money. And maybe some of those offerings will put people to work, okay? And that's what the Jobs Act was all about, jumpstarting our economy. And then the accredited investor would have an opportunity, a plethora of offerings that they could look at, and instead of only investing in Dwaine's deals, could invest across the board. So the whole purpose of the Jobs Act was to let Dwaine advertise. Now, the problem with that is, in the old world, Dwaine knew all of his investors. And I, as an investor, knew Dwaine, and so that was a real, true private placement. Now, in the new world, if Dwaine's going to advertise and take people in he doesn't know, and I'm going to invest in Dwaine and I don't know anything about Dwaine, we're going to add some protection for the investors. And the protection is, Dwaine, you can advertise and take all the people you don't know, but all of them have to be accredited. Those are the only investors you can take. And you have to take a couple steps to assure, not guarantee, but assure that the people who invest with you are accredited. So today we're in the world where people are still doing, and most people are still doing, the 506B. Dwaine's raising money from his database. He knows everyone. It's not advertising. And 506C, Dwaine is going out and going to crowdfunding platforms, going to broker dealers, advertising on Facebook, his new offerings, but he can only take accredited investors. Now, that more people do the 506B, where they raise money from their network, than do advertising today. But advertising is growing, and more people are doing it. But I would say the SEC would say maybe 75 or 80% of the offerings that are out there. And last year there were about 50,000 private placements that we know about.
Wow.
At the SEC, and 70 to 80% of them are still no advertising. Invest with your friends, your family, the people in your database, because most experienced syndicators have plenty of investors. They don't need new investors if they don't know to screw things up for them.
And as far as you say, if you have your database of accredited investors, there's also a term for sophisticated investors.
Sure.
Is there a difference as far as, can those people still invest with you depending on the regulation that you're utilizing?
In 506, across the board, you can always take as many accredited investors as you want. There's no problem with that. In 506B, where you're not advertising, you know your investors, they know you. So there's a little less risk there. So the government lets you take 35 sophisticated investors in any one offering. They limit the risk by limiting the number of people who aren't accredited, the sophisticated investors, to 35. You go over here and advertise and 506C, no sophisticated investors. because you don't know them, they don't know you. You can only take the rich and smart people. So that's one of the reasons many people still do the 506B with the sophisticated investors. I wonder where all the IRA money is. Where's all the self-directed 401k money? You know, it's in a lot of sophisticated investors. When before the Jobs Act came along, the Dodd-Frank set of rules came along and said, we need to change the definition of accredited investors. We need to remove the equity in your primary residence from the calculation of net worth. An accredited investor has $1 million of net worth, but can't count their primary residence. That made a big difference and took a lot of accredited investors, a lot of people who were accredited, off of the accredited list. And as I mentioned before, there's about 1 million accredited investors in the United States today. There were probably 6 million when you count your house. So that leaves us with a lot of people who have net worth of less than $1 million without their house, and have plenty of money, make a lot of money, have money in the bank, have their IRA accounts. And those are sophisticated investors. So you want to be able to deal with those investors, unless you're just going to flat out advertise.
As far as the other regulation where you're bringing in new investors that don't know you, you had mentioned the word ensure, but not guarantee that they are accredited. What's the process for that?
All right. In 506C, where you can advertise, I'll be technical here. The rule is that you have to take steps to be reasonably assured. Take steps to be reasonably assured that the people who invest with you are accredited. And the regulation states that you as the sponsor could do maybe one of 5 things. You could get people's tax returns. You could get their K-1s. You could get their W-2s, their 1099s, some government document that shows that their income level is more than $200,000 a year as an individual taxpayer, or 3 if they're married filing jointly, 200 or 300. So you could ask me for my tax return information. I gave it to you. I mean, I might give you a fraudulent document. That's not your responsibility. You asked me, I gave you, you took steps to be reasonably assured. But let's say I want to verify that I'm accredited through my net worth. I might send you a copy of my my stocks statement from my stockbroker that shows I have more than $1 million of net worth in stock. That would work. Maybe I have a CPA or an attorney who works for me, and I could get them to write a letter to you that says that I am accredited. Okay. Maybe I've invested with you in the past and I've filled out offering questionnaires and I've shown you that I'm accredited. And there's no reason to think that now in this new offering, my circumstances have changed. Okay. So those are 4 things you could do yourself. Probably the most popular one is to go to a third-party website. And there are several third-party websites out there who will take that burden off of you. And you just send Gene to, one of them is called Verify Investor. Send Gene to Verify Investor. I send Verify Investor what they need. So then they send you a certificate that says, hey, we've checked Eugene Trowbridge out and we've taken steps to be reasonably assured that he's accredited. Cool.
Yeah, that's a great, I use that site a lot. Because like I said, it's depending on how the comfort level of them releasing documents to you. So maybe that's just a easier transition for them to go to that website, third party, and then you can be able to get the certificate to ensure that they are accredited to move forward.
Right. One of the things I'm concerned about you asking me for my tax returns is if I send you my tax returns, you have to keep that. You have to keep that for 7 years in case you're ever audited. So that's confidential. Okay. Who else in your office is going to look at my tax returns? I think you have a concern about that.
Of course.
So that's why verify investor, we'll let them worry about that. Okay.
Absolutely. Is there a time limit of, say, you have a new accredited investor that comes into your platform before that you start showing them deals? Is there a general, rule?
No. If two parts of that question. Number one, the accreditation process is only valid for 90 days. So if I sent you a letter from my CPA that says Eugene Trowbridge is accredited and it was dated the first of the month, okay, you have 90 days to get me in a deal, or you'd have to get an updated letter.
Gotcha.
So for 90 days. And then the other side of the coin is if you're doing a 506C, you can just advertise to anyone. We don't care if they're in your database or not. They don't need to be in your database. If you're doing a 506B, Dwaine, a defense against someone saying you advertised and you got me in your deal and I didn't know you and this was general solicitation is to be able to show that you had a pre-existing relationship. And how I define a pre-existing relationship is that that investor was in your database prior to you starting your offering. Now that's a little nebulous, but not in my firm, it isn't. When you sign a fee agreement with me, you just started your offering. So I envision that at that time, your database for this offering is frozen. Everyone in your database up to now can invest in this deal because you have a pre-existing relationship with them. There's a little more to it, but that's simple. But as you're going out there and talking about this deal to new people, you can't take them in this deal, but you put them in your database for the next deal. Okay, you can always talk to people to put them in your database, but you've got to freeze that database when you start your offering. When you do a letter of intent, you don't have an offering, you're just negotiating. When you get a purchase and sale agreement, well, I don't know, maybe you're going to wholesale that deal. I don't know. But the minute you sign, in my world, the minute you sign a fee agreement with an attorney for this offering, you got to freeze your database. Was that clear?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just trying to see that your transition there would also the additional communication, phone calls. You have to like record that. I mean, in case you get challenged. I'll just try to think in those scenarios as well that you should have our database that has that information.
What I suggest, and it's based on a lot of letters that the SEC has sent to people who ask that question. What I suggest is two things. One, you keep an electronic database. I use ACT, maybe you use Outlook or something like that. But when you enter my name in your database, there's a date stamp. When was this file created? Okay, well, good, that's a start. There's proof. Number two, I would send an investor who you just put in your database, I would send them a questionnaire. Not how much do you want to invest in my deal, but hey, I do deals. The SEC has some rules. I'd like to know if you're accredited. I'd like to know if you're sophisticated. I'd like to know if you'd like to talk to me. When could I talk to you on the phone? When could we meet in person? Would you sign this and date this and send this back to me? Two things. Number one, what a great sales tool. If you never hear from me again, I'm not interested. Okay, so don't waste your time with me. If you hear from me again, I'm interested. Secondly, you now have a document with my name and my signature that verifies the pre-existing status of our relationship. And the SEC has said time and time again that that type of questionnaire is evidence that they will look to support a pre-existing relationship.
Yeah, it's very good. I like that a lot. As far as just touching just briefly on the advertising, I know what the specific regulation, what do you recommend as far as a safe way to, potentially bring in investors, bring them to your database? And of course, you said the freeze point, but just to do some type of advertising to say, hey, we're out there, and we would, be open to bringing in investors on deals that can benefit both parties.
In the future, right?
Yeah.
Well, the SEC's instruction on that through their no action letters would be like 3 different steps. First of all, if you're going to do some general soliciting and mass marketing, it has to be generic. Job growth is terrific in Dallas. Because of job growth, there are new households being formed. New households being formed are driving demand for multifamily. There's a shortage of good quality Class B properties in Dallas. Our company has identified that need, and we're putting together a team to address that. If you'd like to know more about it, push this button. I always do that because I have a touch screen. Okay. Push the button. And so now you push Dwaine, you push the button, and up pops a questionnaire. Okay. Who are you? Are you accredited? Are you sophisticated? Are you interested in learning more about multifamily? When can we talk? How can we do this? Would you sign this and submit that? Push the buttons and submit it. Now, there hasn't been any offering. You haven't told them what your track record is. You haven't told them. In fact, it's best when you're doing that if you don't have an offering, because you can't be accused of trying to sell someone something if you don't have anything to sell. So now you've established a pre-existing relationship. Now Gene and Dwaine are going to start talking about, well, what type of multiple properties do I multifamily properties do I do? What Dallas is a big area. Where do I concentrate? Do I have a track record? And we go down the road of building a substantive relationship. And I don't want to get too deep into this, but it's a pre-existing substantive relationship you need with the investors to defend yourself against a charge of advertising. And substantive simply is, hey, I know enough about Dwaine to want to hear about his next deal. Mm. And Dwaine knows enough about me that my risk tolerance would fit the type of deal that Dwaine does. For example, I'm 70 years old. Don't put me in a deal that's a single tenant, net leased, 30-year cash flow mortgage deal. Mm-hmm. Wrong deal for me, right? Wrong deal. Mm. So, but I'd be okay with a 5 to 7 year hold and flip. Okay.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation like that. I like that a lot. I would like to talk a little bit about your book. I know you wrote a book kind of explaining like what's involved in it and what people can learn and where people can get it.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Yes, I'm on the 3rd edition of my book, and it's called It's a Whole New Business. That's not a terribly descriptive title, but why I use that title is when I wrote my first initial edition, it was strictly for real estate people who were brokers who wanted to invest in real estate. And I wanted them to understand that when you put together groups of investors, you leave the real estate brokerage business and go into the securities business, which is a whole different ballgame. It's a whole new business. So over the years, from edition 1, 2, and up to 3, laws keep changing. And my current edition is the crowdfunding edition. Crowdfunding and syndication are basically the same, but there is some things I wanted to put in there and update a couple chapters. So that book's available on Amazon and at $29, and you can just, you can Google me, Eugene Trowbridge, or you can Google the title, It's a Whole New Business, and it's either paperback, if you would, or Kindle.
Very nice. Yeah, we'll definitely check that out. We'll also put a link in our show notes as well as add that onto the video when this is broadcasted. Also, how do we get in contact with you, Eugene, if people want to talk to you in person or talk to you over the phone?
I'm very active on the telephone. Okay, so I would be happy to have someone call me 949-855-8399. That's my direct line. People are surprised because I answer the phone. 949-855-8399. If you want to email me, it's Gene, Gene, at crowdfundinglawyers.net. crowdfundinglawyers.net. And that'll get to me. More often than not, if I get an email and I'm sitting at my desk and I read the email, if you throw your phone number in it, I'll call you.
Perfect.
That's more often than not how I'll respond. So we do that. Okay.
All right, beautiful.
Great. I'd be happy to talk to people. A lot of people just have open-ended questions. They're not ready to do a deal. They just want to know. I'm the guy to sit and chat with you, Dwaine.
And that's a good thing. Before you go out and kind of do stuff on your own, you want to make sure that you are doing stuff the right way, or at least get a little bit of guidance to kind of make sure that we stay within the guidelines and stay safe, as well as provide value to the investors as well.
That's right. I call it a homework call. Call me and do your homework before you go out and make a fool of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fool can land you up in jail too. So really appreciate that.
Okay.
Gene, thank you so much again. I really appreciate you. Gave us a lot of great nuggets, some great tips. Look forward to connecting with you again in the future. Again, it's Eugene Trowbridge of Trowbridge and Sidoti, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Have a great weekend.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dwaine.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Wealth Through Real Estate Investing podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes or the listening platform of your choice. Also, please check us out at DwaineLClarke.com, as well as find us on Facebook for more useful content and resources.